First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to the Morning staff for putting this on, and also for the quality of reporting that you do, and the way the paper seems to get bigger and better all the time. So well done, all those involved in the Morning Star. It is a source of information for all of us that are wanting to be active all the time, and it's a great source of education as well. I think, following the points that Alex made and others about the difficulties of getting votes for strikes at the current time, I realise how hard it is. I've seen the legislation, I know what's in it, I know why it should go, but I think we should also just think for a moment how good the union communication system has become with its members, that we get these turnouts of over 90% and we get these affirmative votes for strike action in such a huge proportion. But remember, the whole legislation was designed to prevent a union ever being able to take strike action, on the assumption that the majority of union members would never be involved in union activity, would be completely unaware of what's going on, and would simply just absent themselves from the vote and the presence. And as it's a postal vote rather than an online vote, that makes it doubly hard. So I just think huge congratulations to all of the unions that have developed that very good communication system. And that is something we've got to build on. And I realise I wasn't at the media session earlier because I was doing the NHS demo, that we have to develop a much stronger alternative media within our society. And all of us are involved in various social media activities. I am certainly through Peace and Justice Project and so on. I think when we have a big event on, which is something that could be widely shared, then all of us have a responsibility to share each other's events so that we can put it online and get a much bigger audience that way. So, you know, we live stream events like this for everybody to be able to see it. It's also about challenging the media assumption, and it's there all the time, that somehow or other this inflation level we're now in is a result of excessive wage rises over the past 10 years. And some of the commentators get away with that on the media, some are not so good at getting away with it, but in reality it's just a massive great lie. What's caused this inflation has been excessive profit taking, huge dividends paid out, tax evasion and tax avoidance. And since wages have gone up on average in the public sector about 2% per year over the past 10 years, always less than the rate of inflation, almost everybody working in the public sector is worse off than they were 10, 12 years ago. Many people in the private sector are as well. And on top of that, the cuts that have been made in health and particularly local government expenditure means that both the health service and local government essentially operate on the moral blackmail of those staff that remain. Many people are just covering up for other people's jobs that have gone and trying their best to somehow or other keep the service going. And so the issues of the strikes at the moment are not just wages, they're also of conditions. And I'm not quite sure exactly where the CWU negotiations are at the moment, so I'm not in a position to comment on that. What I would say is two things. The CWU have done a brilliant job on communication and mobilising of their members, and secondly, that the Royal Mail Group is extremely well off, extremely wealthy, should never have ever have been privatised. It's an absolutely natural monopoly. The Royal Mail Group wants to end the universal service obligation and wants to turn mail workers into self-employed contractors, contract themselves to the company in exactly the same way that Amazon do, Uber do, British Gas do, and so many other corporations. And so I do think that the argument about conditions and universal service obligation are very, very important. The teachers have taken strike action and will be, and Alex is quite right that the danger of this new legislation is that it will be impossible to take action in the future. And yes, it is about wages and salaries. It's also about the salaries of other people in the school community. But it's also about our education system. We need a lot of change in education, which is why I was so keen to have a national education service that went to the principle of free education for all from cradle to grave, that brought colleges back into public control, that brought universities back into public control. Because essentially, they're private enterprises that receive a great deal of public money. And in our schools, our children, I think, start school too early. We should have a much later statutory starting age, maybe 6 or 7, as other countries do, but have creative play, creative engagement of children from a very early age as well, which, if you look at Finland and other countries, have much better ultimate education outcomes. So what do? Stress out our kids in primary school with testing, stress out the teachers over testing children who don't want to be tested and they don't want to do the testing, fear of Ofsted turning up at any one time. And in secondary school, the obsession with league tables means that many students are diminished in their opportunities because they're pushed out of particular exam streams because their unsuccessful attempt at an exam might damage the school's position in a league table. It's a completely bonkers way of running an education system, which has been running on the basis that we should be developing the creativity and enjoyment of every child's education, so they want to learn rather than they're tested into, being made sure they're able to get through some kind of testing regime. And so I'm interested in the education dispute for lots of reasons, and obviously wish them well. And the other dispute, big ones in civil service and rail, the rail one is key because the privatisation of rail through the train operating companies means that huge amounts of public money go into the railways, actually probably a higher level of subsidy than ever went in under British Rail, with more and more going straight out again to the private operators that are given contracts to run services on our lines. And so I'm absolutely with the union on the question of public ownership of them. The last thing I want to say on union issues is that membership of unions is starting to go up, and well done the NEU for recruiting 50,000 new members in the past month, 6 weeks or whatever it is, and all the other unions are seeing quite significant increases in membership because people who are non-union members realise they need to get on board. But, and this is a big but, the increase in membership tends to be largest in the public sector and slowest in the private sector. And the growth in employment is largely in the private sector, particularly in self-employed and gig economy areas. And so all of us as trade union members need to think through how we recruit people who work in the gig economy, how we work with some of the newer unions on recruiting people into membership in Amazon, in Starbucks, in Uber, all these companies, and how we challenge the model, which is one of essentially internal privatisation by companies of contracting out services to reduce their level of central employment, sometimes to evade legislative obligations. And so we need to be thinking a lot more creatively about bringing particularly young people, and particularly those with difficult immigration status and so on, into union membership. But also the union membership model, one that is focused around the workplace, I think needs to be rethought. Uniting the Community is a very good example of how you bring in people who are working in a diverse area of stuff, but also want to stay in the union even when they change jobs. So the idea you join the union, you're in the union for life. You might possibly be in the same union for life, but you might be doing lots of different jobs. But the union is part and parcel of the community and not just of the workplace. And I think the mood and atmosphere on the picket lines this range, this time of strikes, is much more positive towards bringing in other campaigns. Because when you talk to people on picket lines, particularly in London, well, every young person on the line there, almost to a fault, to almost all of them, are living in private rented accommodation, which is very expensive. And so their concerns are as much about housing as employment security or anything else, and obviously wage levels play into that. So campaigns for rent control in the private sector are very urgent and very, very important indeed. It's also, finish on this internationally, The companies we're dealing with are global. The water industry, again, is gracefully privatised, is a global operation. The failure of Thames Water to repair leaks around London is because of the money they're paying into hedge funds in Singapore, Australia, or goodness knows where, rather than running the services. Likewise, so many of the other services we're involved in, service industries, are global companies. We need a much closer organic relationship with unions in other countries that are also trying to organise in Uber, Amazon, Starbucks and all the others, and not allow the far-right racism to divide the labour movement. When Suella Braverman got up and made that appalling statement last week about her new bill to stop refugees coming from across the Channel to land on our shores, the opposition to it was, frankly, well, I'm being generous here, inadequate, because it started talking about the process. It's not the process that's the problem. It's the mindset that says anyone who seeks to be an asylum seeker or refugee within our society is somehow or other an enemy and must be repelled and removed and dehumanised in the process. Well, there are more refugees in the world than has ever been at any time in recorded history. And I was over in Calais last month talking to people there. You could almost make a list of all the military conflicts and wars that this country has been involved in the past 20 years, and then make a list of the refugees and where they've come from. Wars have consequences. The consequences are the poorest people in the most vulnerable environments end up as refugees. And nobody can convince me that anyone would willingly get into some of those crummy little dinghies to try and get across the Channel in winter, crossing the world's busiest shipping lanes. I don't think any of us in this room would even get in one of those things to cross a serpentine, never mind cross the Channel. It is unbelievably dangerous. So I'm looking at these people that have walked thousands of kilometres, gone through hell and high water, thinking they're going to get to a place of safety, to then risk all to cross the Channel. You wouldn't do it unless you were absolutely desperate. When the history books are written of this part of the 21st century, they're going to say to the politicians in government in Europe, what were you doing when people were dying in the Channel? What were you doing when people were dying in the Mediterranean? Did you simply not care about them? And so it is important that we let that voice of asylum seekers be heard within all the other struggles we're mounting, because we want to see a different and changed, completely different form of society where the human value is there for every human, whoever they are, wherever they come from. So I see these strikes actually as, yes, enormous hardship for those that are taking part in strike action, and obviously enormous hardship and great sacrifices are being made. But I also see them as the political alternative to what this government is doing. They're not offering to manage the economy differently. What all the union voices say is change the way the economy is run, change the way there is ownership of mail, rail, water, energy, and so many other things. Change our society so that we don't end up with the fifth richest country in the world, with the richest 10% times 230 times the wealth of the poorest 10%. It is vile, it is wrong, it's unnecessary, and above all, it's got to change. Thank you very much.
We had some founding aims which are guiding us into this period as we come through this strike wave. They are to document and present the levels of action that are happening in this country, not the ONS stats, not the demoralising, there's no strikes happening, but the struggle that is happening out there. Enable others to see the levels of action and easily pass on messages of solidarity. We've all searched those union websites looking for press releases of where we can actually send information. Now we've tried to make that much easier. We want to encourage other workers in their struggle by showing, as has been said by comrades on this panel, it seems now 18% is the new minimum that we should be expecting, comrades, and we should be raising our ideas and hopes. And to bring together those that are leading the struggle. We commend Unite's work around combines and others that are trying to build sectoral reps together. So you fast forward 2 years from a terrible WordPress website, a really rubbish Google map that had about 2 or 3 strikes on it in the heights of COVID, and now our site has been rebuilt twice, mainly because RMT and other comrades keep crashing it with the amount of action they're taking, but also over the fact that so many people now are coming to our website, and our database now boasts tens of thousands of strikes in those years. During this time, as we all know, the real basis for the reaction has been the cost of greed or the cost of living crisis, whichever way you want to characterise it. And we face a political, social and economic crisis. I think that's been said before. And we've seen people winning in small private enterprises to then slightly bigger public sector rises to now the traditional biggest public sector workers taking that action. And it's a continuing strike wave that we hope will continue. So now we have schools, hospitals, rail and mail. In that time, we've been able to sign up 3,000 people in the last few months to visit a picket, a very simple online form where you say you're going to go to your local picket line and we provide you with those details. People may have seen just before the new year that we created our loyalty card scheme off the back of what you'll often see with a cafe, in which every picket line you go to, every closer you get to the 10, we will give you a prize. And what we've said is that pickets for prizes, but solidarity is always the winner. We hope that you will join that campaign and claim your free prizes, but more importantly, to give that solidarity on those picket lines. And as we move from the digital to the physical solidarity, it's important to say that just since the end of August, 700,000 views of our website. A website built with very limited resources, supported by people like the Morning Star and the people on this panel, and that is what we've been able to achieve. And we urge the rest of the Labour movement to continue to support StrikeMap during this period. And since August, we have now over 1,000 people WhatsApp, the dreaded WhatsApp, but everyone uses it and it's an important tool. And over 1,000 people now in regional strike clubs, and we hope to grow and build them, linking with trades councils, trade union branches and others. These huge levels of engagement and solidarity prove we're facing a period of renewed struggle, fueled by the deepening cost of greed crisis. And as the billionaires' class profits increases off the back of declining workers' wages and standards of living, it's important that we continue to fight. At StrikeMap, as we said, we've been putting those strikes up, we've been supporting workers in struggle, and then later last year, with the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, and now with ASLEF, we launched Organise Now. A simple system where those that have got a whole wealth of experience, those that are relatively new to our movement, are able to come together to provide support and advice to those that want to organise at work. It's a first step towards developing that higher density that everyone in here has talked about that we need to do during the strike movement. Workers who want to organise, maybe they're sick of a moribund union in their workplace, maybe they want their union branch to be more transformative. They fill out a form, within 72 hours, they get a phone call from someone who can help and guide them on those next steps. This is not a guru model. This is not a model that tells workers how to organise. It's a model that offers support and an ear to be able to ensure that people can organise at work. And now we hope to announce next week the National Union of Students becoming a partner. Again, we urge the rest of the Labour movement to join and support that as an initial step to increase density in this country. It's not an original idea. Just like StrikeMap, it's actually a relatively simple one that we can't believe people haven't done before. But in America, our sisters over in America started Emergency Workplace Organiser Committee in 2020 with the idea of how do we organise Amazon, how do we organise Starbucks, and how do we start to organise places like Trader Joe's or the equivalent of B&Q in this country. And so far, over those 2 years, the Emergency Workplace Organiser Committee, using the same system that we're now doing through Organise Now, has organised tens of thousands of people. And we hope that we can reach that same scale. As we move into a space where we're not organising instead of trade unions, but we are supporting people taking their first step into getting into trade union activity, and not just joining a union and saying I'm a union member, but getting stuck in and taking on that boss as people on this panel support every day. We've gone for our biggest and most ambitious project yet, and we're doing it with other organisations, and that is on the 29th of July. You're all invited, everyone's invited, everyone here should be a troublemaker, and if you're not, you should definitely become one. We're launching a Troublemakers at Work conference on the 29th of July. Many people in this audience will be aware of Labour Notes in America. Again, you can see a theme here, which is still whatever the Americans are doing very, very well. You can come along and we will have rank and file workers leading sessions all across our movement about how to build struggle, about how to continue that struggle when we've not got a period of heightened strike action across the movement. And we hope that that will be led for workers, by workers, and we hope from that we can continue to build on the work that we are doing. I want to finish by saying we hope that everyone here can support StrikeMap, and if you haven't already used it, please go and have a look. Think about affiliating your trade union branch or also becoming a paid subscriber. It is completely worker funded. And if you haven't already, we've got our brand new, very snazzy, one of our fantastic designers is in the crowd today, very snazzy organised now leaflets on the front store. Take them with you, hand these into workers as you go into your cafe, as you go into your restaurants, as you go into places where people are not traditionally organised, and see if we can get more people into trade unions. And most importantly, see you on the 29th, comrades.
All trade unionists seek to get a deal for their members. We don't go on strike, we don't ask our members to lose money, we don't ask them to put their jobs on the line in some cases because we want to provide a platform for people to sell them newspapers. It's the other way around. The left shows solidarity and workers show solidarity to other workers on strike. And the reason for those strikes is because we're seeking to achieve a fair go and a decent deal for our members and improved pay and conditions. So we see that yesterday, for example, or earlier this week, the Education Institute for Scotland, the largest teachers' union in Scotland, has just achieved a very significant breakthrough on pay and achieved a pay award that their members have voted for. We know that the CWU are currently in extremely protracted and difficult talks, which will, I think, they'll be publishing something tomorrow on the outcome of those talks with the Royal Mail group. And we know that in my own union we have a referendum that's going on at the moment for some of our members employed by Network Rail. The important thing about all of these negotiations is that we have to remember that trade unions are the primary defensive organisations of workers. And workers are facing a crisis. That's been said by many, many speakers. I'm not going to repeat that because it's a truism. But the fact is that crisis is intensifying. It is not going to be alleviated. And I've just been reading a man called David Malpass, who's the president of the World Bank, in Global Economic Prospects, their annual yearbook giving prospects for the world economy. And I suffer from insomnia, and sometimes this helps. But he says, and this is written just last month, or published just last month, our latest forecasts indicate a sharp, long-lasting slowdown, with global growth declining to 1.7% in 2023 from 3%, which we expected just 6 months ago. This deterioration is broad-based in virtually all regions of the world. Per capita income growth will be slower than it was before, in the decade before COVID-19. The setback to global prosperity will likely persist. By the end of 2024, GDP levels in emerging market and developing economies will be about 6% below the level expected on the eve of the pandemic. Median income levels, moreover, have been eroded significantly by inflation, currency depreciation, and underinvestment in people and in the private sector. So we're not coming out of this economic crisis, we're going into an intensifying economic crisis. That's the reality that our members face, that all people in this country and other countries face as well. And so we need a political strategy based on the activity and the class struggle of our unions. And my union is committed to playing its part in developing that strategy. And I think, from what's been said earlier, and I think it's the case, that the most fundamental priority that we must have is the repeal of the anti-union laws. And I'm going to say this, that I think the Labour Party's current policy on paper, the New Deal for Workers, which is to repeal all of the Tory anti-trade union laws brought in essentially since the last time Labour was in government, since 2010. So that would include the current minimum strike levels legislation, that would include last year's law that allows employers to bring in agency workers to scab on workers who are on strike, that would include the 2015 Act, which brought in thresholds for trade union ballots and a number of other issues. That is the current Labour policy is to repeal those laws and to put in place framework agreements, fair pay agreements, which would allow sectoral collective bargaining. Now, if the Labour Party under Starmer moves away from those commitments, which they've made in writing at conference to senior trade unionists in this country, then I think that is the litmus test for the relationship between trade unions and the Labour Party. Because we have to get rid of those laws in a few months' time, when the minimum strike levels laws are through the House of Commons for their third reading and become enacted. It will be illegal for teachers to take strike action unless their union instructs them to go to work and cross their own picket lines. Education is covered within the minimum strike levels agreements. It will be illegal for transport workers on the Woolwich ferry, on Abellio London buses, on Network Rail, on London Underground. It will be illegal to take strike action in this country and withdraw your labour that you voted for under extremely strenuous thresholds within the anti-union laws. And if your union doesn't instruct you to cross your own picket line and go to work, then your union will be sued not only by the employer, but also by members of the public. And you will find, this is a new Taff Vale judgment, you will find unions being sued out of existence by Daily Mail readers who claim that they were going to the opera that night but they couldn't get there because the bus wasn't running. So that's the plan, and we need to get those laws repealed, and nothing is more important for our movement than getting our freedoms back as trade unionists and getting those laws out of the way. I think I'll finish on this, Bob, because I can see you shifting into my field of vision there. I think politics follows class struggle. Politics is a reflection of the class relations underneath the surface. And the class struggle in this country is at a level we haven't seen for 3 decades. So we should, as socialists, understand that it is our job to deliver a political reflection of what our members are calling for when they take that strike action, when they protest against the attacks on their civil liberties. The thing about strike waves is that waves break. We have to find a way to keep them together, to keep our power together, and to give it political expression. Comrades, we're in a strike wave, surf's up, come in. The water's lovely. Thank you.
We have to recognise that in this moment that we're living at this moment, the extent of class struggle, over 1.5 million workers have taken or balloted for strike action. That's incredibly important. That's actually more than 1979, which was supposedly the winter of discontent, stupid term coined by Larry Lamb of the Daily Mail. This should be mass discontent that's continuing, and the point about this struggle is that it offers an opportunity to build something very important, and that's class consciousness. And class consciousness, therefore, is part of this ideological struggle. And this is where the Morning Star, I think, has got a very, very important role to play. Very important because the ruling ideas, as Mark said, in any society are those of the ruling class. We've got very little opportunity to challenge those ideas, but we do have through the Morning Star, and therefore it's got a vital role to play, but it's got a vital role to play in another direction in terms of the class and class struggle that's persisting at the moment. Why do I say that? Actually, it's simple. 12 unions nationally have taken out maximum shareholdings to the Morning Star, and therefore they sit on the management committee. Thus it is that the Morning Star has got a critical role to play in the economic and the political struggle. Why? Because it is the point of unity, or could be the point of unity, for you at least bringing together these disparate elements of the class struggle, and they are divided, let's face it. We have got two rival organisations and rival unions, but the Morning Star has got the possibility of bringing this together, which is why in London we did organise them successfully, two very important meetings which sought to bring an understanding of this perfect storm of wages, prices and profit, falling wages, rising profits and absolutely mammoth profits. That's our message. We understand that, we're socialists, and that's the message that we have to ensure well, we have to point out that message because that's the essence of building class and class struggle. Now, that means, for me, that what we have to do is to seek at every possible way to build a united front. I don't say a popular front yet. The united front is the key to ensuring that there could be a popular front. A popular front is something that actually could lead to socialism.
The truth is that people have had enough. They've had enough of poverty, they've had enough of being taken for granted, they've had enough of being disrespected, they've had enough of always being at the back of the queue. And they're at the back of the queue for a very simple reason. We all know that, and everyone in this room knows that. The ideologically driven policies of this government and a political ruling class. There is class war. Let's not hide away from it. It's class war. And so everyone who's taken a brave stance, because it's not easy in the current climate, it's not easy when you literally are seeing the biggest drop in living standards that we've seen since the 80s for people to withdraw their labour. So the RMT members, the CWU members, in particular, the UCU members, my own union members in PCS who've taken so far just one day of national action, but we'll come on to that in a second. To lose a day's pay in the current financial climate is a sacrifice, but it's not just a sacrifice, it's a sacrifice and a half. The fact that there's so many prepared to do it, so many that are willing to make that sacrifice, tells me that we, for the first time in quite a long time, have to have a genuine hope that the tide is turning and the narrative is turning. Because I think the best example of which this morally bankrupt government is all about is the very short-lived Truss government. When they declared in their so-called mini-budget last September to the entire world what we have always known, that if you haven't got money, you're an irrelevance. If you're not rich, you're not going to get help or support from the Tories. Now, they were blatant. They were blatant in what they did last September. And I, for one, actually was quite glad that at last the Tory was there for all to see what we overknown Tories are about. Absolutely devastating everyone in this country apart from their own. Devastating everyone for this country, including those who they tried to convince for the last decade and more that actually you are one of us. We're the voice of the people, we're the voice of the workers in this country. That was all blown out the water last September. And comrades, while they feather their nests and while they continue to deliberately and ideologically drive the working class into poverty, and I mean abject poverty, I think we should all applaud the work of unions and union workers and union members that have been saying for the last year, no, not anymore, not any longer. I just want to give a few quick examples of my union's members, PCS, the old union, PCS. We're civil servants in the main. We don't just represent civil servants, but we also represent private sector workers and other government workers that are linked to the civil service. But in the main, it's a civil service union. And I think gone are the days with the myth that is being put out there, the civil servants are somehow highly paid, get brilliant conditions of service, get a fantastic gold-plated pension. I think everyone knows that's always been a lie, but actually now the truth really is laid bare. But I don't think it gets spelled out enough. That actually, every public sector worker who's been under attack, certainly since 2010 when the first coalition government was formed, but the government that is our direct employer for 90% plus of our members has a special place of vindictiveness for its own workforce. because we are truly always at the back of the queue. Last year, we had a 2% across the board pay rise imposed right across the entire civil service. At a time when everyone knew, every economist was saying that inflation was going to go above 10%. Everyone knew it was going to go way above that. 2% being imposed across the board. Now that equates to an 11% real terms pay cut. And last year in my own department, DWP, which I'm the group president of that, we went out to our members and asked them how the economic crisis was impacting them and their families. We thought we'd get maybe 102, responses. We were absolutely inundated. 48,000 members of PCS who work in the Department for Work and Pensions literally sent in thousands of testimonies. Some of the most heartbreaking that you could ever read about how they were struggling to make ends meet. Going in, providing vital public services every day, including, despite popular myth, during the pandemic, when the job centres remained open, when they were being forced to go into the workplace every single day to do the work, to provide vital benefits, paying a record amount of benefits during our pandemic period. Our members told us, in no uncertain terms and in the most powerful way possible, of how it was impacting them. And so I'll just give you one example. There was a work coach in a job centre. There was a married woman, 2 young children, the youngest was 4. Quote unquote, "I'm letting my children down, my 4-year-old down. I don't see any light at the end of this tunnel. I'll be amazed I'm still here after Christmas." That's somebody who has to go in every single day into a job centre and provide services. And they were saying that because they literally couldn't make ends meet. They then went on to say that because their husband has a more physically demanding job, for 6 days out of every 7, they made sure the husband had the meal because they needed to keep up their strength to do the job that they did. So they went into work either with a half-empty stomach or an empty stomach. And that is a real testimony, not made up by the union. And we presented a 176-page dossier to the department and to the government, just in DWP alone. That doesn't include all the other government departments out there. So when we now know that from April, the 1st of April, 43,000 civil servants in the 2 biggest government departments, DWP and HMRC, are going to get the national living wage uplift, because if they don't, they will be below the national living wage from the 1st of April. 43,000. That is poverty pay, that is in-work poverty. When we know that 45,000 of our members are now claiming benefits, the benefits that they administer, 40,000 have confirmed that they've used food banks and do so on a regular basis. And the list goes on and on and on. We're getting theft of our pensions by overpaying, thousands of redundancies being faced. Already we've lost nearly 1,000 staff in DWP alone, attacking our redundancy terms. And while the Tories are feathering their own nest and looking after big business, the public sector, the NHS, teaching, everywhere, is absolutely under the cosh. So I just really want to close with these comments, comrades, because everything that we know we have to do, everything we know is absolutely right to do, I believe is now in the public domain and they're in your face every single day of the week, more than it's been in decades. And so I want to give a shout out to next Wednesday. We've already seen the 1st of February, 500,000 public sector workers taken to the streets, doing towns and rallies, attending picket lines, sending a clear message to the government and their employers, we're not going to take this anymore. But there's going to be 750,000 workers out next Wednesday. There's going to be a big rally and demo here in London. The NEU and other unions are joining forces. We're having our own demonstration and then heading to Trafalgar Square to join up with the comrades at Trafalgar Square as well. But we're seeing other demos take place around the country. Well, next Wednesday is huge. Absolutely huge. But it can't be about the 1st of Feb or the 15th of March, as others have said here today, because we have got to be clear that no matter what we achieve in this coming period, whether we get good deals, whether we get deals that are actually better than what we had, and each union has its own right to decide, and members in those unions have the right to decide what they can accept by way of deals. But what we have to make sure is that the message that the stakes could not be higher has to continue beyond this period. Because our task is not an easy one, is it? If it was, quite frankly, we wouldn't have panels such as this after we address conferences such as this. Our task, we know, is one that is going to be difficult, is going to be one that is hard, is going to be one that will face opposition especially media opposition. Well, the path is clear. We either build and grow, we organise and mobilise collectively, and we can force and win our demands as workers and for those who we provide services for if we do that, or we'll have missed an opportunity, and our legacy will be one of missed opportunity. Now, I know everyone in this room, and I know all those thousands of workers, hundreds of thousands of workers that have been taking action in the past period. See that clearly. They won't go away. But I'll make a plea. Let's not individual or political ego get in the way. Let's make sure that we don't just turn back to our homes and go to our workplaces once we've done our bit in this struggle. Get to every picket line, get to every rally, continue to build the links that we've built in this past period, because we are in and always will be in the fight of our lives until we turn the tide. Now, I am hopeful, very hopeful, that that tide is starting to turn. Because I can't remember the last time when you turned on the media, you saw people getting interviewed on picket lines, the public, especially during rush hour traffic or whatever, you know, in London, going to rail stations. And the majority are supporting the strikers. The majority are saying that they accept exactly why those workers are on strike. So colleagues, let's remember this. The working class united can and will never be defeated. We are in the fight of our lives. But you know what? We're having it, we're bringing it on, we're getting bigger, we're getting stronger, and we ain't even started yet.
It has shaken the government, and their attempts to demonise workers for taking strike action and fighting back have failed. The majority of our class, the working class, support their fellow workers in their struggle for fair pay conditions and workplace rights. The period before the current strike wave was one of an extended lull in industrial struggle. It was also a period of setbacks, some defeats, and if we are to be honest, sellouts and betrayals too. In every period where there is a lull in industrial struggle, we are told, including by some supposedly on the left, that the working class no longer has the stomach for the fight. The recent strike wave has proved that to be nonsense. Whatever barriers are put up in front of workers, and no matter how long they are in place, workers will always move into struggle in the face of attacks on their wages, terms and conditions, and they will always look to their unions to lead those struggles. There will be plenty of lessons to be learned from the current strike wave. There's always lessons to be learned, but whatever the outcome of the current disputes, I think one thing is for sure. We've entered a new period of struggle in which our class will be forced to fight back time and time again. New generations of workers have now had a taste of their own power. New activists are emerging from the strikes. And more importantly, there will be no pause in the attacks that workers face on a daily basis. Yes, there will be setbacks, but workers will be compelled to fight. Whatever the outcome of the various talks going on at the present, it is of the utmost importance that we keep going on, organising in the workplaces, making sure every workplace is a bastion of union strength, train and develop the new generation of activists, build resistance in every single workplace to challenge employers who've had it their own way for far too long. We must do more than simply train activists. We must educate them and inspire them too. It is they who will be at the very forefront of organising workers to fight for their conditions and rights in many of the local disputes that will erupt, as well as in future national disputes. These local disputes will be particularly important in the public services, not least in the NHS where I organise. We've already seen a series of disputes in recent years as the most marginalised and exploited workers and outsourced contracts have fought against low wages and for parity on terms and conditions, like access to sick pay. London is the most expensive city in Britain in which to live and work. NHS outsourced employers have tried to impose ceilings on low pay, whether workers are on Agenda for Change NHS conditions or on the London living wage. NHS pay per hour is in some cases lower than the London living wage of £11.95 an hour. This is why GMB Union is currently balloting ISS cleaners and hostesses across 4 major South London hospitals for action to achieve their pay aspirations, a bold move to break away from the current imposed pay structures. We have proved we can win such disputes against employers, as we did in Croydon University Hospital when we won a 24% pay increase for the lowest paid contracted workers there. But I'm not saying local disputes are the only way forward. Local disputes are part of a national struggle against the exploitation of public sector workers who have been the target of decades of attacks by one government after another, with the aim of preparing these services for outsourcing and privatisation through the demoralisation of staff, through low wages, staffing conditions and underfunding and cutting services. The entire political class, and I include the Labour Party in this, are totally committed to delivering for big business. The privatisation of the NHS is now at a highly advanced stage. They're so confident that adverts for private health insurance are now a regular feature in our media. The latest Apple Watch is being offered at discounted rates by one private insurance health firm at the moment. We know that the Tories are bad, and yes, we want to get rid of them, but it would be the height of irresponsibility, in fact it would be a lie, not to say out loud that Starmer and Streeting are intent on driving through privatisation of the NHS as a key priority of any future government. When Streeting says private sector contracting is socially useful, he is telling us in the plainest language he intends delivering for the ruling class, not our class. When Streeting says he will make GPs salaried employees, he is offering up control and access to the NHS to the big corporations. Labour is backing away from every single promise made, including those to renationalise water and rail. This is why we must do more than to fight local disputes. The trade union movement needs a national coordinated strategy based on these simple demands: no cuts, no privatisation, no exceptions, no exemptions. We also need to demand the renationalisation of the major utilities and for all privatised public services to be brought back in-house. Any politician who does not support these basic demands is no friend of our movement and no friend of our class. And anybody who thinks such demands are pie in the sky, I'll tell you this: no, they're not pie in the sky, they're a question of survival. Because if we do not win back what has been stolen for us over the past 4 decades, we will have neither a national health service or a welfare state in 10 years' time. We are under assault on all sides and in every aspect of our lives and in our workplaces and in our communities. I live in Croydon, one of the most deprived boroughs in London. The Tory mayor this week managed to successfully push through a 15% hike in council tax, something that will devastate low-wage workers. But that's not all it will do. It will further drive cuts and privatisation. And this was only possible because 33 Labour councillors who promised to oppose this rise actually abstained and allowed it to go through. Well, that should be no surprise really, because Labour supports cuts and privatisation as the Tories do. So yes, let's get rid of the Tories, but let's not sow illusions in the likes of Starmer and Streeting. Our movements must commit to expose and oppose any attacks on our class, whatever the colour of the government of the day, Labour or Tory. We're under attack on the industrial front, but we're also on the political front, but we're also under attack on the ideological front too. I suspect there'll be those in this room who don't like what I'm going to say now, but I'm going to say it anyway. There is a wave of reaction against women's rights underway internationally. I don't trust every poll I read, but experience tells me a poll saying a majority of young men believing women's rights have gone too far is both a wake-up call and a warning. So excuse me being blunt, I'm sick and tired of so-called socialists and liberals who, rather than embrace the materialist concept of class struggle, have now capitulated to anti-materialist, neoliberal, postmodern nonsense, and that tells us that our task as socialists and communists is no longer to transform the world, but to transform the language.
Comrades, on the 13th of February, we were able to announce victory at Abellio in southwest London, where our bus driver members won an 18% pay increase on their basic pay. And just to be clear, that's a 1-year deal, an 18% increase on their basic pay, improved overtime rates, improvements to the scheduling agreement, and absolutely key for us was the reinstatement of our SAPS representative with all charges dropped. Because what we cannot have, largest in this country, is our members being victimised. Now, I could cut my speech very short and say that's what victory looked like, but I'll make no apology for repeating an updated statistic that we are very proud of. Since August 2021, we have now been involved in more than 600 separate disputes, winning 80% of those. And now our research department estimates putting some 300 million in extra earnings into the pockets of our members. And just to be clear, that's 300 million taken from the bosses and put into the pockets of our members. Winning double-digit pay increases. Relatively recently, East Midlands Airport, 10%, and the Leicester bus workers who won 13%. I mentioned 18% earlier on, and that is my favourite figure, because on the Woolwich Ferry, where we've had a number of industrial disputes over the years, we are now conducting a ballot of our members about a possible agreement that involves an 18% increase for those people who work in the car park at the Woolwich Ferry, backdated to 2021. When we take action, particularly against private companies, we go to great pains to show that it's affordable. And by the way, not just private companies, but the private and public sector as well. With the private companies, we have a team now of forensic accountants who do the business and give us the figures. We have publicly stated time and time again that the top 350 FTSE companies increased their share of profits by something like 3/4 since 2021. These people made profits out of the pandemic, and banks are rolling in it. So for us as trade unions, there is an argument to be putting forward to say the money is there, the wealth is there, it is affordable. To us in the room, I'm sure that's obvious. However, we need to be coming forward with those facts and figures. And in the public sector as well, what we've been pushing for the last couple of months or so is when we found out that the major energy companies are making something like 170 billion in excess profits over the next 2 years. Well, it's quite obvious. We'll take 50 billion of that, thank you very much. That will help us pay for our NHS workers to be paid a decent wage. It will help fill the so-called black hole in the economy, and there will be there will be change left over as well. Within local government, our policy is absolutely clear. We do not believe that a single cut needs to be made in local government. That's why we've been calling on councils to pass needs-based, no cuts, legal budgets. And that's why we've also been calling for nationalisation for public services without compensation for the rich, but with a degree of democratic control for communities and workers. Look, we also want to avoid painting workers as victims, because there is a danger that sometimes we end up going down that road. You've all seen it, Kay Burley doing something on Sky TV where she says, look at this poor family going through Sainsbury's and they can't afford the expensive biscuits and that kind of nonsense. Of course, when the poor family decide to take action, it becomes something completely and utterly different. But the strike wave shows that we are anything but victims, and our role instead is to show that what we're asking for can be done. The money exists, the wealth exists, for both of them to be done now, and we demand that change now. But crucially, workers will not be the victims of unfairness, simply sitting back and waiting to be saved by heroes from elsewhere, if you like. Instead, workers through their trade unions, as we've seen time and time again, will be the agents of that change. And we talked briefly about the dispute in Coventry with refuse workers, which we won last year, and the important point there's a couple of important points, which is that firstly a Labour council spending millions, the latest estimate is 7 million now, to try and break the strike rather than settle it. It would have cost a fraction of that to have settled that dispute. Instead they chose to employ agency workers. But what did take place there was a victory, a pay increase of over 13% for our members, and we were very clear with those councillors who were also Unite members rather. We suspended their membership. It is incompatible. If you are going to be a member of Unite and a Labour councillor, we don't expect favours. We expect you to be doing the right thing. And in local government now, we are just beginning a national consultation along with Unison and with the GMB for our members right across local government for industrial action based on this year's pay award. Now, there will be, of course, a number of Labour councils involved in that, and once again, we're not asking for favours. The question we're asking is, whose side are you on? That's the question that we will be asking. And look, the other point I wanted to make today is that we've had a number of disputes, but strike action isn't just about pay, and that's, I think, important in light of the legislation being proposed to attack our rights. When I first became a trade union rep a very long time ago, the first dispute that I was involved in was against the employment of a member of the British National Party in the civil service office that I worked in. So we have strikes about dealing with racism. We have had a strike at UPS Parcels, where that was about dealing with racism, which was won. We have had strike action in Unite against sexual harassment, again, on the Woolwich Ferry, which was won, because those members there, mainly male, defended, not just stood up for, but stood with their woman, a colleague, who was being disgracefully sexually harassed, and instead of saying, let's rely on the grievance procedure, they said, stop that, we're going to walk out. And as a result of that walkout, those managers who were engaging in that sexual harassment were dismissed and sacked. We've had strike action to defend public services, like the Bromley Library strike, and at EDF Energy, we've had strike action against unfair dismissal. Once again, instead of saying we're going to rely on the employment tribunals or an internal disciplinary procedure, our members at EDF Energy took strike action to defend their colleague and won him his job back. And of course, there was the dispute in the NHS, and our members have asked me to make clear again and again and again, this is not a strike merely about pay, important as that is, this is a dispute about saving the NHS. So the point I'm making there with all those examples is that obviously how important it is to defend our right. It's not just about pay, important as that is, but about our ability to take action to defend a number of different areas. Within Unite, one of the developments is to form combines, to bring together different reps from within that sector, from different companies, so we can start putting forward shared claims. It is ridiculous that in London, for instance, we have a separate pay campaign for Arriva London North and Arriva London South. It makes absolutely no sense, but through those combines, we are now bringing those reps together from the different companies to build up shared campaigns, shared pay claims and campaigns as well. But I've got tremendous hope going forward. I think the NHS strikes have been incredible. I think the best form of flattery is often imitation. And we've got new layers prepared to stand and fight. What I meant about the best form of flattery being imitation, a couple of weeks ago, never mind Gary Lineker and the solidarity from Ian Wright and Alan Shearer, a couple of weeks ago, the Welsh rugby team were talking about strike action. Absolutely. So, best form of flattery, imitation, but look, the point I'm making is there are new layers coming forward. But let me just finish on this point. I think whatever the outcome of the current strike wave, there will be no return to complete calm. I think we can take that as read. Our role will be to help those new layers joining the unions to become consistent fighters and also to win lasting victory. And the very last point is the appeal from me and from our union is for us to build not just a moment, but for us to build a movement. Thanks, comrades.
People will be familiar that we've had 40 years of the erosion of employment rights, starting with in 1980 with the ending of the closed shop, but a really crucial part of those Thatcherite anti-trade union legislation was the prohibition of secondary or solidarity action. It's quite interesting to watch Match of the Day with that thing unfolding and thinking that that's the kind of action that has got people sacked over the years and has been outlawed. but in a broader sense as well, there's been privatisation of the public sector, outsourcing, the erosion of collective bargaining through that process, fragmentation of employers, the indirect employment, and particularly of kind of bogus self-employment. And also the globalisation of manufacturing in particular, and the transferring of operations to developed countries at lower wages and so on. And then more recently we had the 2016 Trade Union Act. People will be very familiar with the elements of that, restrictions on industrial action, threshold balloting, tying the unions up in red tape. It's ironic, isn't it, how keen the government are on red tape when it comes to trade unions. No bonfire of red tape there. But in the last 12 months, they've been extraordinary in terms of industrial action. It's hard to imagine really that P&O was only 12 months ago, and then we saw the reaction to the kind of strike action by, particularly by the RMT, but the postal workers as well, from the government in a kind of raft of legislation, and that came around very quickly, almost as if it had been planned, you know. But we knew what was coming. Grant Shapps wrote an article in the Daily Mail, of course, where he revealed a 16-point plan in the summer. 3 of those have sort of become a reality. There's the lifting of the ban on using agency workers to strike break, huge increase in fines for unofficial action, and of course the now notorious minimum service levels strikes bill. And that's going through its legislative process at the moment. But there is a wider context as well, which I think the IER have been keen to stress, which is the erosion of collective bargaining. In 1975, as John Hendy likes to say every time he makes a speech, 86% of the workforce was covered by collective bargaining. We are now down to 25%, and that's one of the lowest, in fact the lowest rate in Europe. At the same time, union membership has gone from 12.8 million in 1980 to 6.4 million today. So that's the scale of what we're up against, and I think it's the industrial action that we've seen is impressive and inspiring. There is also a context which is really important to bear in mind, because strikes alone aren't enough to win the war. When I was interested to listen to Claudia speaking about the garment industry, because that's what we kind of that's a kind of extreme end, but there are lots of trade unionists and non-trade unionists who are not covered by collective bargaining agreements. So proportionally, there's a small proportion of members that are of the workforce that are actually allowed and able to take strike action. Having said that, does that mean that these strikes aren't significant? Of course not. They're incredibly significant, and the unions have taken strike action, have led from the front and really changed the mood of the country. So there's increased awareness, I think, especially from younger people about trade unions and strike action now. And of course, unions are winning for their members and increasing the confidence of working class people across the country. But it does, those kind of wider considerations do give a bit of a sense of the scale of the task that we're up against. And it's also the reason why I think trade unions can't avoid politics. So when we're thinking about some of the different aspects of that, the New Deal for Workers that is still fairly intact from the work that I did with Laura Pidcock and the IER did with Laura Pidcock as Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights, that will wither, that will fade if there isn't a huge amount of pressure on the Labour Party to keep those commitments. And there's no doubt that the agenda that went into that manifesto, the 2019 manifesto and the 2017 manifesto before that would have represented a huge shift in terms of power in this country had it come to pass. But it would have been under attack. It would have been organised against by employers. And the problem is when if there's not a groundswell of grassroots activism to back that up, then it leaves those legislative programmes and all of those policies isolated. So I think it's very important to understand the kind of wider context of where trade unionism sits and the need to be backed by a grassroots movement. So, I mean, I always see it as kind of like organised people against organised money. I think that's a good way of seeing the battle. And I think it's very important for trade unions to look for political allies and not to divorce themselves from those wider political movements. And obviously people are demoralised, and we've seen the fragmentation of the left recently, but I don't think that should undermine what is, and we shouldn't ignore that those movements have been incredibly important and powerful. So what does that mean in practice? Just to finish on this, I think it means not writing off those people that found a home in the Corbyn movement. I think it means keeping on building. Numbers are important, plus organisation. It means avoiding closed organisation and cliques. It also means accepting differences, debates, and the fact that people make mistakes. And so we should be building our movement again and again and again, not around purity tests or anything like that, but building our knowledge and experience together.